time, a big day. It's underway, this double dissolution election campaign, and pretty much as you'd expect from both sides, I think, to kick things off.
Well, the choice of this election is very clear. It's a choice between the coalition. We have a plan for the economy, a plan for jobs and growth, whereas Labor has no plan for the economy and, of course, is pushing for higher taxes to catch up with all their spending promises and higher taxes in a way which will hurt the economy and cost jobs. So the choice of this election really is about securing the successful transition in our economy that is currently taking place, making sure that we continue to head in the right direction, implementing our plan, our national economic plan for jobs and growth.
Are you worried, though, that that fairness message that Shorten articulated today, that I believe in a country that still is committed to the fair go, that resonates? That could be damaging for a Prime Minister, particularly one, as we know, a very wealthy one, and that's obviously something Labor's trying to tap into as well.
Well, we absolutely believe in the fair go. But what Bill Shorten is doing, every time he opens his mouth, he's making another unfunded spending promise. Right now, he's making about $65 billion worth of promises over the current forward estimates, which are not funded. So it's not fair, in our judgment, to make people believe that they can receive certain services and benefits from government when they're not funded. It's not fair to push up taxes higher when that's going to hurt jobs and growth, when that is going to hurt the economy and make it harder for people across Australia, for families, mums and dads across Australia to get ahead.
But you say it's not funded, but even in the budget reply, he articulated tens of billions of dollars in savings compared to what the government had put forward.
Well, firstly, most of what he articulated in his budget reply speech was tax increases, tax hikes. Tax hikes are not savings. Spending reductions are savings. He identified about $100 billion in tax hikes, not over the forward estimates period, but over the next decade.
But tax cuts that aren't implemented aren't tax hikes, are they?
Well, Labor is promising...
It's just the status quo.
Well, Labor is promising higher taxes than the coalition. We are promising a more competitive business tax rate. Why? It is a central part of our plan for stronger growth and more jobs, because a more competitive business tax rate will help us attract more investment, will help us boost productivity, will help us grow the size of the economy on a permanent basis by more than 1%. It will help us create more jobs, and over time will help us lift real wages and living standards. So Labor is just playing catch-up with all their spending promises by pushing taxes higher than they would be under the coalition, and that would hurt jobs and growth. Now, just over the current forward estimates, on Thursday night in his budget reply speech, the budget position actually deteriorated by another $3 billion. Eventually, Bill Shorten will have to come clean on what his policies are going to cost, not just over 10 years, but over the next 4 years.
But the government's also not coming from a really strong point on this anyway, are you, given that the deficit has grown, debt has grown since you've been in office?
Well, since we've been in office, the budget position has improved every time as a result of the policy decisions that we've taken. Yes, we've faced some additional global economic headwinds. Yes, the price for iron ore has fallen quite dramatically on our watch. That is something that would have happened irrespective of who was in government. And because of what is happening in the global economy, that is why it is so important that we continue to implement our plan to successfully transition our economy from resource investment-driven growth to broader drivers of growth in a strong and diversified economy.
Was it a mistake not to extend tax cuts below that $80,000 mark? Because we've seen the Galaxy poll today. It's got 50-50 on a two-party basis, but also a sense that the budget just wasn't fair, despite the effort to try and take measures on concessions for the wealthy on super and other measures. It's still not seen as fair, given you didn't go to those on the very lowest wages.
Well, our budget is our plan for jobs and growth, and it is a plan that is fair. It is a budget that delivers tax cuts and incentives for small business and hard-working families, and it pays for them through a crackdown on tax avoidance and by better targeting tax concessions. Now, we always would like to be able to do more when it comes to tax cuts. Our instinct is lower taxes. Look at what Labor is promising to do. Labor is, by their own words, promising to increase the tax burden in the economy compared to our policy positions by about $100 billion. That is going to hurt jobs and growth. That is not going to be good for the transition in our economy that is taking place.
But have you provided the tax relief for enough at the lower end, given given this perception that seems to be there, according to the Galaxy survey today, that this budget is not fair, given that was the threshold at which your tax cuts kick in?
This is our third budget. In our first budget, we we abolished the carbon tax and the mining tax. And the carbon tax, incidentally, came with compensation tax cuts for low-income earners, which we turned into genuine tax cuts by getting rid of the carbon tax. The carbon tax abolition has led to significant falls in the price of electricity, which has been good for families and business across Australia. In last year's budget, we, of course, delivered the initial wave of tax cuts for small business. In this year's budget, we have been able to deliver further tax cuts for small business and hardworking families, targeting middle-income earners on full-time average weekly wages. Additional tax cuts, additional tax incentives funded by our crackdown on tax avoidance and by better targeting tax concessions.
Why did you get rid of the deficit levy? As Labor says, the deficit's still there. It's still a big problem. It's worse than what it was when you put it in place.
Well, what Bill Shorten has done, of course, on Thursday is to announce a permanent increase in personal income taxes. We actually...
Only at the top end?
Well, the temporary budget repair levy is actually still in place in 16-17. So Labor is spinning this. I mean, you shouldn't just trust whatever Labor says in relation to these matters. In 16-17, the budget repair levy stays in place. But of course, what Bill Shorten has done as one of his many measures to push up taxes by about $100 billion over the next decade is to lock in on a permanent basis what was always intended to be a temporary budget repair
levy. For those earning over $180,000 a year.
Because it pushes up the top marginal tax rate, which is already very high, even higher. Now,
what's the problem with that? Explain what is the issue with that?
It is bad for jobs and growth, because what it'll do, it'll provide a disincentive for people to work more and save more and invest more. And what we need to ensure in order to have the best possible opportunity for everyone across Australia to get ahead is we've got to have a tax system that is growth friendly, which is why we have made the decisions and the judgments that we've made as part of our economic plan.
Bad for jobs and growth, but you put it in there. You put it in the first place
on a temporary basis. Bill Shorten.
So keep it on a temporary basis.
Well, no, Bill Shorten is locking it on a permanent basis because he's of course banked $16 billion in additional revenue on the back of higher taxes, which essentially locking in the elevated level of taxation.
You could have kept it for another 3 years, or keep it until you get rid of the deficit. It is called a deficit levy.
Well, as I've said to you, in 16-17 it is actually still in place. So Labor is just playing smokes and mirrors here as part of their efforts to hide Bill Shorten's $65 billion.
But hasn't it made you exposed to a lack of fairness, argument?
Well,
you're giving tax cuts to people on $1 million.
Well, we're not giving tax cuts. I mean, I'm just telling you, like, our budget over the next financial year, the temporary budget repair levy remains in place. But what we've done in our budget, delivering our plan for jobs and growth, focusing on what we need to do to ensure that we can secure a successful transition from resource investment-driven growth to broader drivers of growth. What we've done is we've calibrated very carefully what we can do in our tax system to make it more growth-friendly, and that has involved, a specific tax cut for people on full-time average weekly earnings.
My final question relates to the leader, Malcolm Turnbull. Does he have the discipline necessary to keep the message as focused as Tony Abbott did in the last two campaigns? While he's been criticised for various faults as Prime Minister, as a campaigner he was very effective. Does Malcolm Turnbull need to be more disciplined, sharper in his messages during the campaign?
I'm not a commentator. Malcolm Turnbull and all of us in the coalition team, we are out there doing the job, presenting our plan for jobs and growth, putting the choice forward to the Australian people, and it's up to the Australian people to judge.
Matthias Cormann, thanks for that. A quick break, back in just a moment with Peter Credlin and Simon Banks. Stay with us.